So, Maxi, a natural place to start. First off, thanks for being part of the show. But I think as we're talking before recording, a natural place to start is the subject of resiliency, and of course during the pandemic, right? So, curious to learn a little bit about your biggest lessons. Let's say since you joined Bus.com, and particularly since being CEO, your biggest lessons learned over the past year or so.
Um, it's I thought I was a resilient person before the pandemic, and I think that it was definitely a good challenge to prove it and to test it out. They say being resilient is having faith, even in the darkest moment, that you'll find a solution. And I think that's definitely true of what we went through at Bus.com in the last year and a few months, which is, in the start of last summer, we had no line of sight of how we were going to recover in terms of revenues. What started off as being a short-term pandemic, and soon became, well, when is it going to end? And um, I think that in terms of resilience, um, it was about showing up every day with that hope, with that confidence that the solution was out there. We just hadn't found it yet, and that's really what sort of got the troops through it. Right, that great energy.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those things about leadership is like, taking action even when it's not easy and even having to show initiative. And we'll get into Bus.com a little bit because I find some of the initiatives you did, like for instance, the Bus.com Angel program, which I
Mhm.
found fascinating as a way of showing to the market that you guys are, pushing and innovating still, and
Mhm.
also internally that, hey, we still got some fight left in us. So I find you've shown some leadership lessons. So maybe, yeah, talk about some of those programs that you guys did when obviously everyone's at home. You can't take a bus. Your core business has been essentially stopped to a halt. So how did you think through what initiatives you would tackle?
Well, initially it was really a war room. When all of this happened, we saw all of the cities sort of starting to cancel all their trips. It was a run for their money. And you can imagine that in a travel business like ours, that was really significant amounts. So it was all about changing our business processes. We had to make it a lot more flexible. We had to take care of safety of our employees, but of our different stakeholders. And customers primarily. And then we had to take care of cash, of course, and all these other things that were immediate. But once all the dust settled, what do we do? And at that time, certain governmental programs were in place. And I think you shape your culture not when everything goes well. You shape your culture when moments are hard and you have tough choices. And we the executive team got together and we could have cut some people earlier, but chose to keep them on board a while longer to do two great things. One, to give them a little bit more visibility on when their last day was and not just do it immediately, but two, to also really help our partners. So we're a marketplace, and we want to take care of and our customers, but also the businesses that we help thrive throughout North America. And so we took those employees and we did a program which is called the Bus Angels program. These individuals, these bus operators, usually have around six buses each. They're not necessarily the most sophisticated business owners, and so they really got a lot into seminars and help. We actually got on the phone and renegotiated their financial obligations so that they could survive the crisis. And we wanted to be a good corporate citizen in that. So that's something we did, and I think that definitely today the bus operators remember us, but also those employees that we had to let go of also remember that we try to do everything to minimize the impact on them and be fair to them in a very difficult situation.
And maybe to roll the clock backwards, right, and talk a little bit about your career, right? Like you I think your first job was at KPMG out of school. I think you went to JMSB as well. So I'm also an alum.
Yeah.
So proud Concordian. So you went from KPMG. You're climbing the corporate ranks at CAE. So like big companies, obviously big, safe, safe-ish, cushy jobs. You never know, but still very, very big jobs. So walk us through that time in your life where you decided, hey, I'm going to take this jump into this small startup, and yeah, your thought process behind it.
When you tell that story like you just did, it's a head scratcher. Why would she do that, right? And she had such a good career blossoming. I'd say a reverse story. Why did I get into business? Why did I get into JMSB to begin with? There was definitely a desire to have a business of my own eventually. And that was always the goal in mind, not truly knowing how I would get to sort of a CEO or GM role. But it was more of a reverse trend. So when it came time to choosing my major, I took accounting because I thought that was really being the doctor of business, where you could actually understand how things work. And in your first year, you get to meet CEOs and CFOs. And I made my whole career really a training program of what I thought, if I reverse the trend, how could I get to the CEO role? And by the time where the Bus.com opportunity happened, I was at a place where I felt I learned so much from these large organizations, and how to do the best practices, and also things I didn't like, and what kind of business that I want to run, with what values, and having a lot more flexibility. And that was something certainly that I was eager to get. And I'd say lastly, what excites me is this massive growth in front of us. We've got this massive market opportunity. We have the chance of being the Uber of buses. And by the way, just in North America, that represents a $17 billion opportunity. This is massive. And the reason why it's sort of invisible, when you think about buses, you think about Greyhound, and it just went out of business really in Canada. You don't hear about all the private bus industry. It's sort of invisible because there's no brand that sort of unites them all, and that's what we have a vision to do. So I think that's completely compelling, and we have a really a great opportunity to be able to do that, and that excites me, and makes me made me want to join the bus.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I had written was total addressable market, right? So it seems like a small little niche thing. Actually, when you said 17 billion, I'm like, you could probably build a pretty solid company in that TAM. Just to stay on 1 second on your let's say corporate experience, a lot of articles have been written, lessons that big companies can learn from startups, because startups tend to be more agile. Is there
Yeah.
an opposite? Are there lessons that startups can learn? Having been in the corporate world for a few years, and obviously you gained a wealth of experience that has led you to take on the CEO role. Any of those lessons that you think might be useful?
To large organizations.
No, from a corporate organization to a startup.
Sure, sorry. I think there's definitely a couple of things. I think one is that um, startups tend to love experiments, but my question would be, does the answer exist already? Sometimes there's a lot of rebuild of things that don't need to be built because they already exist, or the answer is there is a best practice, and so there's no need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. I totally agree in innovation for customer delight and efficiency. But I think sometimes that's overdone. And I think that comes with a little bit the maturity of the startup, of bringing on people that come from maybe more experts. I also think that startups can learn to bring on the right type of experts at the right time, and bring more sophisticated management practices. Often startups, especially in the early days, you don't necessarily have people who have had a wealth of experience in management, and that can be difficult for the first line employees that just have a suboptimal maybe working experience. Those would be two takeaways, and I feel like giving you a free one for the large enterprise is to do a lot more experiments. I feel having worked in large organizations, they and not be specific, but it's really generalized. There's not enough risks that are contained. They don't know how to manage small risk and doing experiments, and I think that's something that large corporations could really learn to do better.
Yeah, I think those are really good lessons. I think particularly the one around not reinventing the wheel, right? So some things like sales marketing, like there's a wealth of knowledge that's been done. So we've been like improving this for decades, right? Versus like trying to reinvent. Hey, we're going to build our own, like sales strategies. Like, yeah, just learn from the best, hire VPs from these companies, and just accelerate, right? So I think that's such a good lesson for startups to learn, because these things exist. They've been optimized.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to dive into Bus a little bit. So Bus.com, maybe explain the business model a bit, how it differs versus other companies in the space. So yeah, just a little bit more on how the company makes money.
So Bus.com, we're a network of local bus operators that's powered by on-demand technology. We make group transportation and public transit more attractive to more people. There's really no other company that does this in North America. There's some competitors loosely in Europe, Flex Mobility, and others that try it maybe in other locations, but we're the by far the largest. And locally, we're really competing with some other brokers, but other operators. Um, we have, through our marketplace business model, can really scale beautifully and standardize an industry where 50% of people are unhappy with the services they're currently being provided. So uh, I say they make our life easy to delight them.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal that tagline. So, and then what on the unit economic side? So, like, how do you improve your partners on from a unit economics perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, these small and pop operators across North America, their average age is 55 years old. They don't have a digital presence. They've bootstrapped how they do their business, and we come and bring them a digital business they would not otherwise be able to go get. And so we increase their utilization, and at the same time, we get good rates that we can then share with the different people around that area, and it really creates a perfect flywheel. I also think that, post pandemic, we've been doing a lot of transit and transit deals, and these are, in RFPs, requests for proposals. And in these requests for proposals, certainly these operators don't have the level of sophistication or the technology to be able to bid on them. And so they see tremendous value in sort of selling their inventory through through Buzz.com. And I think, the way I would see it is more like how Airbnb does it. We, as a platform, try and give services to our operators. We offer insurance. We offer different added value, not just the revenue, to them, so that in fact they want to run their entire business through us, right? And want to grow their business, buy new buses to do Buzz.com business with us.
Yeah, you use the word platform, right? So it's like, as you know, like as a tech company and being valued as a tech company, you're providing a platform. I find that a nice way to explain it. And like you said, just growing demand. So like the dollars and cents will help bring more people to your to your business,
Mhm.
but then also providing tools, right? So tools and access to make it easier. I'm sure you've gotten this question a bunch, but like, have you ever thought expanding outside of buses specifically, or is it just a question of focus or economics that keep you focused on the bus industry?
One of the first things that happened when COVID hit is that we had the intuition that smaller vehicles was actually going to be a big thing for a while. And so we made tremendous efforts to make partnerships to get new types of vehicles, including Sprinter vans. And now, in the last year, we've been able to offer Sprinter vans across North America. And so we've already added smaller vehicles. And now we're able to sort of cater to anything above 8 people. I think the market segment of under 8 people is well serviced by the Uber, Lyfts, and Enterprise and Avis of the world. But I think there's really nobody above that grade, and have difficulty sort of responding to that. So we want to make sure that whatever amount of passengers, as you come to bus.com, that you get an amazing service, and we have the right vehicle. That's really one of our key offerings.
Yeah, it's funny as we're talking about like resiliency to start, like all the like shitty things that happen, right? Like as CEO, as you're managing a business, your eyes seem to light up when we're talking about like the cool new stuff that you guys can do, right? So I imagine
Mhm.
like the fun part of the job as CEO. So it's like we've talked about the bad stuff, but yeah, I'm curious as like what are the fun parts? Is it really about thinking about the vision, thinking about growth? Is it talking with your shareholders and like getting their input? So curious to hear you.
I really love my job. Honestly, I really like everything I do out of it. The being, I like the complexity of the CEO role, where there's complex decisions where you don't have full visibility on all the knowledge you would need to take a decision. I love growing my people. I often say I'd love to build the PayPal mafia. I'd love to have the Buzz.com mafia and see all my employees grow to become their own founders and be highly successful in their own businesses afterwards. That's something that really excites me and I love about my job. I um, I think fundamentally, I love that we're in a business that's good in the world. We're not, we are getting people in buses and we make buses sexy. We make it a fun, attractive way to move around. In the buses, people have fun. In the buses, they don't use their cars. And so we do something good for the environment. And that's really important to me.
Yeah, I think it's like for one bus equates 50 people or 50 cars, right? So it's like, helping reduce the footprint. Have you been thinking about, electric vehicles and the impact, these like, so obviously we have, electric vehicle companies right here in Quebec that are growing and innovating. So curious to hear you about that part of the business.
Absolutely. So, for the moment, electrification of buses or larger vehicles has really just been done in fixed routes, mostly at the municipal level. And there's a good reason for that, is because there's no technology that predicts if, or good technology predicts if a trip can be run with an electric bus. So we've done some MVPs on that, and we think that we're well placed to be able to have all the data to be able to run this on throughout the industry. Some barriers, though, that we see are, for example, the fact that the operators are smaller and don't necessarily have the funds to buy, these buses that are more expensive. But and there's also sort of a training shift that needs to happen. So we think we're uniquely positioned to train different operators across North America. And maybe lastly, when we look at the types of business we run, about 50% of what we do could be done with electric fleet. But I think we're not going to get there tomorrow. I think it's going to be as we replace the fleet, bring on more electric, and hopefully within the next 10 years, we'll be in a very good position where a good percentage of all of our trips will be electric.
Yeah, it's just such a fascinating subject. I find it's like because right now the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle is cost prohibitive to a large extent, right? Like limited by range, more training, a lack of infrastructure. So like for a small small mom and pop, like you said, shop, it's almost like a no brainer to not do it, right? So it's not that we're not quite there yet. But like I like how you guys are positioning yourselves to be like, hey, we want to be that platform to help you accelerate that shift, to give them the tools.
Absolutely. And I mean, if I can speak a little bit more, I think retrofitting is a thing that we should explore a little bit more, and replacing the motor. What's the cost of that? And obviously, maybe, some Quebec companies won't be liking me about my retrofitting ideas, but I do think that it has a lot of value. And the other thing that I think has promise is, other types of technology, not necessarily electric, but we talked about. Sorry, it messes my mind, but these are better for long term fleets. So when you're doing, let's say, an 8-hour trip, technology is being built today that won't be necessarily electric that can actually do that. And it might be a better solution and more reliable for buses and trucking that are long distance. And I think in that regards, we're definitely monitoring what's happening on the trucking side as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I imagine this is one of your core tenets of like your investment thesis, like in terms of like growth. Like, what are other interesting areas of growth that you see, like for Buzz.com? Is it just geography? Just like we've nailed our model, is doing more in more places? Is it deeper services? Is it all of the above?
It's it's definitely geographic, but within North America, I think we've done a really great job on this sort of blue states and on the signs, and we want to have penetration even deeper. And you've asked about other countries. I think with a URL like Bus.com, we're very well positioned to do the rest of the world as well. But I think we have a little bit more to do here. and we are growing in different ways as well. We're now offering ancillary revenues. We're also offering new services to bus operators, and I think there's going to be a lot more of that in the next 2 years. Really expanding or reaching what we're already doing, and I think that's going to be very build a very resilient company, a company that is more prepared to IPO.
So that's the plan. IPO. I like the ambition. Um,
You got to think about it. You got to build a business that's solid and complex.
Yeah, yeah, and I think also has a high moat, right? High barrier to entry, right? So because once you get in, you have that expansion, then it's going to be very hard for competitors to come in and try and seize it, just because of your wealth of knowledge, industry expertise. It's going to be hard to match.
Well, absolutely, and I think once you're integrated with all the operators, they're using your technology. It's more difficult to change as well.
Yeah. Are there areas or trends that you think are not don't have enough attention right now? Like everyone's talking about electric, but there are other trends in the transportation sector, maybe more writ large, that you're looking at, but are not, let's say, quite on the horizon.
Well, I'll talk about a couple of trends. Let's talk about Greyhound stopping to operate. What's happening in intercity in the vacuum that it's left? That's definitely going to change the landscape in Canada. But you have similar dynamics in the U.S. Let's talk about the deregulation of Ontario of all the busing industries. So, except for safety regulation, everything's been removed, and so. To take a taxi analogy, because I know some, our listeners may know more about the taxi industry, it's regulated in the similar ways with geographical restrictions, certain permits for certain types of rides. With this deregulation, we're going to see what happens. It's been done in Germany before, and you see really a mass adoption to more novel solutions like Bus.com. So really exciting to see what's going to happen in Ontario, and I think that's a huge trend. And I think it might catch on to the rest of provinces and obviously states as we see what happens there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about the deregulation in Ontario just by having done a little bit of work in the field, and like it scares some of the more traditional operators here. But for you guys, it must be like a boom. It must be like Christmas, basically, of like it opens up the door for innovative startups to come in and help.
What we've seen in other countries is when that this has happened, and certainly that there's ultra competition. So it's the survival of the fittest, but I think we're better positioned for that. We want to make sure that the best operators come on top and the ones we deal with. So I am cognizant that not it doesn't please everybody, but I would say that it does help. Um, and when it that's been Ontario's approach, while in Quebec, the approach has been really to keep regulation and certain permits to a said company and subsidize said company to sort of subsidize their business model. So a different, completely approach from government, which is we'll see on time what is best for the writers. I think we want to keep as much offering as possible, and even I would say, I think. You want to make the bus experience as interesting as possible. There's a bunch of, we talk about millennials not wanting to own cars and Gen Z, and we need to have solutions for them not to have to buy a car, and they need to be attractive in the level of 2021, and that's what we're always delivering every time we do. We offer services.
Yeah, it goes back to user experience, right? Which you guys are good at, like providing a front end that works, and obviously working on the back end. That's the tough part.
Yeah.
What do you look at when you look at your internal metrics and your own dashboard? Like, what is the post-pandemic or almost hopefully post-pandemic world shaping up to be? You seeing some areas like with more activity? Where are you optimistic? Where are you pessimistic?
Can you ask that question again?
So when no problem. So when you're looking at your internal metrics, your dashboard of activity and routes,
Yeah.
where do you see the trends in terms of post-pandemic world? Like where do you see like good news, bad news, for instance?
Great news for us. I think there was uncertainty about if people would want to get back into buses, get back close to one another. How soon would that happen? And the answer is clear. It's back now. People that are double vaccinated, and once public health restrictions are lifted, will want to get back into buses. And so we've seen a really, really sharp recovery that exceeded my expectations by far. That even surpassed previous levels of demand. And in terms of metrics, maybe certain groups are obviously wanting to get back together a little bit faster. So one big trend that I see is the return to work. A lot of inbound of companies not knowing how to attract their employees back to the office. There's a desire to have people back at the office. And after money, the second biggest concern is traveling. And so we're uniquely placed to sort of address that new type of demand. Things that there was always employee shuttles, but I'd say that's something that's definitely new. There's a lot of concerns still with um, sort of blue collar shuttles, making sure people stay in their bubbles. Sorry, bubbles still. That is definitely a new trend that didn't exist pre-COVID. But there's definitely this euphoria and pent up demand of people wanting to get into buses, which I'm really happy about.
Yeah, maybe a few closing questions for you, Maxi. It's just a fascinating conversation, but you mentioned your big ambitions of a going IPO, which maybe not be that big, like if you guys are growing quickly. So yeah, what do you see as the big milestones along the way right now? Like in terms of hitting, going in and being an IPO, is it a question of years, months? Like how do you see it?
Yeah, I love the question of there's a bunch of companies that are SPACing these days, and I just saw one actually. Swivel, a bus company, three. I think the valuation was 3 billion. Um, not that far ahead of us, and they're a big company in Africa. Um, but this said, I think coming from a larger organization, I know that one of the important things that people underestimate is the ability to make your quarters. And so that maturity over the organization of being able to forecast, to hit your forecast, to manage the street is definitely what I'm measuring. Of course, being a larger organization, I think helps to that, but it's not the only metric that I look for. It's really the maturity of the organization and predictability that I'm looking for that makes it good. And I think the it's a good outcome for a lot of people. It's a liquidity event. I think it's something very desirable. But you want to make sure that once you become public, you don't um, have a rocky ride after that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and if you think it'd be great for the market as well, right? So having like more public tech companies out of Montreal, I think is only be a good, is going to be a good thing. And yeah, I think this has been a fascinating interview, Max. It's like I was really happy to have met you. I find myself probably going back several times and re-listening to some of your lessons. My final closing question is just like where people can connect with you, learn more about Buscom and the great work you guys are doing.
Absolutely. Well, please connect with me on LinkedIn and the company. Follow us. We that's probably where we're the most active in social media. And if not, if you want to learn more, you can go to our website, best.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maxine.
Thank you for all your great questions.